True Crime Society podcast contains adult themes and violence and is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. And if you'd like to skip the intro or move to any specific part of the podcast, please refer to the timestamps listed in the episode description. Thank you. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the True Crime Society podcast with Stephanie and Olivia. It is October 10th, 10:10 here, 6:46 p.m. in New York, and it's dark. Daylight hours are dwindling. Winter is coming, as they say in Game of Thrones or whatever. Yeah. It's getting dark. Used to be light out till almost like 8 o'clock at night. Those days are over.
Yeah, beautiful and sunny here. We had in our Patreon, we were talking about daylight savings, so our time has changed. So the days are long and sunny, generally are nice. So enjoying it while we can.
Yeah, as if figuring out our time zones isn't hard enough sometimes. Then they always got to change every couple months because Olivia's time goes forward and then mine goes backwards. So then we have a really big gap. And then when it happens again, then we have a smaller gap because yours goes back and mine goes forward, and it just never ends. And they're not even at the same time. So then we have like an awkward month in between.
Like, I wonder how everyone in all different places determined when these things happen. Like, it's the same thing. Like, for us, even with like, I know our seasons start on the first day of the month. Like, whereas I know yours, like your start of the summer and stuff is random. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder how everyone's decided when these things happen.
I think someone just like made it up one day and we were all like, okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
But yeah, spring break is almost over here. So the kids go back to school on Monday, and then the next break is the big summer break. So that's very exciting.
I went on like a little spree of buying things for the house, like more furniture, decor type stuff. And decorating's so hard. We've probably said this before because I've been thinking this since the day I moved into this house. I feel like sometimes I get things and I'm like, yes, perfect. It looks amazing. It's like cool. It's unique. And that happens sometimes. But then sometimes you see something online and you're like, oh, I like this. I think it'll fit perfect. And then it comes in the mail and you're like, this can't be the same fucking thing that I thought would look so great and cool because it looks stupid. And then and it is, but it just isn't it. It ain't it. I just got this end table and I can't decide how I feel about it. It's like rusticy looking. It's like wood. But it's a little more rusticy looking than I wanted it to be. And then you just like have all these random things and you're like, okay, I don't like this here for what I intended it for. What else can I do with it? Because I'm not going to friggin' return this. Hello? Like, I'm not returning an end table. But, you know, it'll grow on me. I think we just need some like lamps and some like little tchotchke things. I don't know. Decorating's hard.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to get it all to tie in together.
Yeah, especially colors and color palettes, because I just didn't want everything to be white and neutral. It's hard. And then there's so many things where I find that I think are cool, but then I'm also like, I'm an adult, and this is something that probably isn't very adult looking. I mean, it's coming along.
It's good. You'll have to send some photos in the Patreon chat.
Yeah, when I get it together. I did put out some Halloween decorations, which is fun. I forgot how many I had, because they've been stuffed in a box for a while. But it was fun. Put out some Halloween stuff. I got some lights to put outside. And I've never been able to decorate outside really before. Well, growing up when I lived at home, my family did when I was younger. But then when I lived in an apartment, as I said in the past, I didn't have like a yard or anything I could really decorate. So I've been trying to figure that out, because then you don't think about all the logistics of it all when you're like, oh, I want to put this in my yard and it has lights. But you're like, oh, I need a plug. And so then you either have to run it through a window or like, I don't have that many outdoor plugs. And I'm like, these are just the things you don't think about.
So much harder. Why are they making it so hard?
But any updates with you? What's going on? You watched the documentary?
So I watched a show and I wanted to talk about it because I think you guys would be interested in it. And we did an episode on it like forever ago. I actually can't believe it's been over 2 years since this case happened. I was
Wow.
thinking it was probably last year, but it's not. It's 2022. But it's on Netflix and it's called Jailbreak Love on the Run. And it's about the Vicky and Casey White story. So if you're not familiar with that, basically Vicky was a prison warden and she fell in love with an inmate, and basically she had worked there for over 20 years and she set up her whole retirement. Like I think she retired the day that she helped Casey break out of jail. They went on the run. They were on the run for 11 days and Vicky ended up dying of a self-inflicted gunshot apparently. But at the time it was a massive case. Like we followed the manhunt as it was happening. They went to a hotel. She had sold a house. She'd set it all up. Like basically this had been planned for, and I learned a lot from the documentary as well. They'd been in a relationship for 2 years in the prison. And I thought, when I saw it was coming up on Netflix, I'm like, oh, it's going to be cheesy. It's probably going to be, I didn't even know what I thought it was going to be, but it's actually a documentary essentially. They play a whole bunch of their recorded phone calls between them from when he was in prison and he would call her, a whole bunch of CCTV from the prison. I learned a lot about their relationship. They would have sex in the jail while he was incarcerated. They would have phone sex. Like it's so. I was watching with my husband. I'm like, oh my god, this is so awkward that all their personal information is coming out. But it's really well done. They interview her colleagues at the jail and basically how they couldn't believe that Vicky would do something like this. And then it goes into how the end of the manhunt happens and then how she apparently died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And it was really strange because I think we did know this at the time, but it was to the back of her head, which is a very weird place to shoot yourself if you're going to shoot yourself. So I did find it interesting because I personally think in the episode, and I know Casey's a criminal, like I'm not caping for him, he's a horrible, horrible person, but he did seem to really love Vicky. But then they go into it at the end about if he really did and was he just using her?
Or if he just saw an opportunity.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It raises a lot of it's interesting. It made me think about things probably more so in that case than I had in the past. But it only goes for an hour and a half. It's a 1 episode kind of single documentary. So if you're looking for something to watch, I really recommend it. Let us know what you think. It's very interesting. It goes into a lot of personal details about their relationship.
Yeah, I was just gonna Google about, because you said how she shot herself in the back of the
Yeah.
head. I was gonna Google if that is, like, did she know something we don't just from her job? Like, if you shoot yourself in the back of the head, you're more likely to die versus sometimes people do in the front and they fuck up. But then I was like, I shouldn't Google that because that's probably a bad thing to Google.
The other thing is too, so I don't know if you're not familiar with the case, basically they were found and they went on a car chase and there's 911 footage. So apparently she mistakenly called 911 because she doesn't actually speak to the 911 dispatcher.
Well, it was like, wasn't it the car or something?
No, but then they said no. In the documentary, they said the OnStar, I think is what it is, didn't call 911. Yeah. In the documentary, they actually say it was Vicky who called, but she doesn't ask for help. She just you can just hear.
I wonder
if
she had the crash detection or something.
Yeah, but so basically, she says to him, and I'm paraphrasing, but she says we should have stayed at the hotel. And she's like, the airbags are going to go off and kill us. And then they crash the car, or he crashes the car. And then it's in kind of like a ditch and it's on its side. So the only, I know I'm getting a little bit off topic, but basically maybe because of the position she was in, maybe that's why she had to shoot herself in that.
Easier.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the only thinking. But then, so after that, they say in it, it's a self-inflicted gunshot, but then they also kind of insinuate a little bit that maybe he was involved in the gunshot. And even when they get him out of the car, he was pretty unhurt. I think he had a bleeding ear or something. And he's like, is my wife okay? Is my wife alive? Tell me where my wife is. It's very, very dramatic. But maybe because he knew that she was probably going to die. But I feel like in the end, in the documentary too, they say she told a colleague something like, I'm going out with a bang, because she announced her retirement very suddenly. She wasn't that old. I think she was in her 50s. And all of a sudden she just came and told her manager, hey, I'm burnt out. I'm retiring tomorrow, which is the day that she fled with Casey. It wasn't I feel like when people retire, we know it's coming for months and, it's a big thing. She did it very quickly. I feel like she knew, if it was self-inflicted, she knew that she was going to go to jail. And even in the episode, they say that she knew what jail she would go to. She didn't want to be around those people. So for her, that's why she killed herself, which I can absolutely understand as well. But maybe
And also
he
how
did it.
embarrassing.
Yeah, I know. How embarrassing.
Like to have all your shit leaked and have all this stuff come out about, I would be humiliated.
Yeah.
Your whole reputation, because she was well respected, I think, in her job
she
to
was
some extent.
very
A lot
high
of people
up.
liked her.
Yeah.
And the humiliation alone would make me be like, well, that's it for me.
And even like, so what happened, how they would call is she had kind of a burner phone that he would call. Obviously, if he was calling her work mobile from the prison, they would maybe figure that out. So she had some other phone, and he said something to her along the lines of basically, it can't be traced. And she's like, absolutely, it can be. Like she knew, she wasn't dumb.
Yeah.
She knew she was playing the game. She kind of tried to minimize the risk, but she knew that what was going to happen to her if they got caught, and they did get caught. So, and they interview his cellmate at the time. It's just a whole bunch of different perspectives and things that we didn't know. It goes into a lot of detail. So yeah, really recommend it.
Yeah, I have to watch that, and I have to watch Love is Blind. Got to get on with it. This episode, we're going to be talking about some medical murders, something a little different from the norm, even though we've done a few like medical type murders in the past. One being Lucy Letby. She was the British nurse. She was convicted of murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 7 others between June 2015 and 2016. We've talked about her a few times and her trial and all that. But today we're going to be talking about some nurses who used insulin to kill patients. And Olivia found this stat that says, according to the National Library of Medicine, it's estimated that an average of 35 Americans are killed by healthcare workers per year. But the true number is likely higher given that these crimes are often missed for a long time. And any of the convicted healthcare workers, the serial murders, they're usually charged with fewer murders than they admit to or might not even know all of them. And I've said in other episodes where we talked about this, because when I worked at a law firm, they did medical malpractice. That stuff's just, it's hard to prove. Doctors kind of know how to hide their mistakes, even if something happened that wasn't on purpose. So especially if someone's doing shady shit on purpose, they kind of know how to explain it away, especially when you're just the average person. Like they'll be like, oh, this happened because of XYZ and blah, blah, blah happened. And you trust these medical professionals that they're telling you the truth. So, and you don't know what they're talking about. So you're just like, oh, okay. So it really takes a lot for some of these to come to light, or if it's just so blatantly obvious. That's why it seems like a lot go under the radar too.
Even with the Lucy Letby case, I feel like now she's been convicted, there was a whole bunch of evidence regarding other babies that she killed. Like I feel like there should have been enough to convict her, but in the end she was only convicted of the 7, whereas she was probably involved in dozens more.
Yeah, because it's hard to prove, like, did what that person specifically, what they specifically did, is that actually what killed them?
Yeah.
Or was it, like, other circumstances of what was going on? And that's always, like, the argument. So it's scary to think that that's what goes on. So today we're going to talk about 2 different cases. Like I was saying, we're going to start off with a Pennsylvania nurse. Her name is Heather Pressdee, and she was convicted of murdering 3 of her patients, and she's actually connected to the deaths of 17 more.
Accused of at least 3 homicides and multiple attempted homicides, Heather Pressdee listened to each and every one of her alleged victims' families, describing what she allegedly took from them. Nearly every one of these individuals describing Heather Pressdee, one-time nurse, as nothing short of evil. The Butler County courtroom of Judge Joseph Cubitt was packed with people filled with both rage and emotion.
She's pure evil.
Melinda Brown is the sister of Nick Simbel. 41-year-old Heather Pressdee pleaded guilty to killing Simbel in Sunnyview Nursing Home in Butler. Pressdee allegedly telling a nurse that some patients, like Simbel, needed to die.
There's no justice for this. We'll get justice when she meets her maker.
Elizabeth Simmons Ozella and Matthew Simmons are the children of Irene Simmons, who Pressdee injected with a fatal level of insulin, despite the 78-year-old woman not being diabetic. Simmons was also under Pressdee's care at Sunnyview.
It needed to be done. My brother and I needed to come today. We've been looking forward to being able to say what we feel. We know it's probably falling on deaf ears on her side, but anybody who can do what she did isn't going to care about a few words what we say.
So she's still with us. She's just not quite the person she was prior to this.
Marissa Hiles is the niece of Betty Hutchinson, who survived Prestee's attempts to kill her with excessive insulin. She had a stroke, however, and is unable to feed herself and speak. Patrick Carney, meanwhile, addressed the court on behalf of his brother-in-law, Jack Rogers. Rogers survived being shot down in a chopper in Vietnam. He got the Purple Heart, but he did not survive Heather Pressdee.
Justice, the only justice we want is it to happen to nobody else.
And while she would eventually tell her victims' families in court that she was sorry for her part, Prestee didn't want to talk about what she pled guilty to us. Why did you hurt those people, Heather?
Have any remorse?
Are you as evil as they say you are? Why them? They were helpless.
Do you have anything to say to the victims' families?
She was born Heather Irene Prestee on August 28th, 1982, so she's still pretty young in her career, I guess.
Yep.
From 2003 to 2004, she attended the Community College of Allegheny County, but she didn't graduate. And after that, she worked as a vet tech for 14 years, mainly at the Pittsburgh Veterinary Specialty and Emergency Center. And she told police that she provided critical care to animals, which included anesthesia and euthanasia. So Heather went back to school in 2018 and graduated with an associate's degree in nursing. Between July 2018 and 2023, so this would be from her licensing all the way up until her arrest, she worked at 12 different nursing facilities, and from every single one, she either resigned or was terminated. So I get job hopping and all, but that's a lot in that
that's
period of time.
Over to a year, essentially. So that's a lot.
Yeah, and especially when you're getting terminated that much and there's some resigning in there, I feel like some of the times it's when they kind of force you to resign. They're like, well, you either step down or we're going to terminate you. So a lot of the information that we have here comes from the various criminal complaints related to the case, and we linked all of them in the blog if you want to read through them. So Heather was investigated for abusive behavior at Encompass Health Rehabilitation of Harmarville, and that's where she worked from October 1st, 2018 through April 21st, 2019. And she was disciplined for administering insulin outside of a physician's orders. Investigators said her employee file noted that she was reprimanded on December 7th, 2018 after an insulin error. A corrective action plan dictated that she would meet with supervisors to review the insulin protocols, and a supervisor at Encompass told investigators she was concerned that Heather was harming residents and took actions internally. And we don't know exactly what those actions were, but that's what was said. So at least twice, Heather made up past colleagues to use as job references, but they were really just relatives that she had pretend to be her past colleagues. And the relatives would later confirm to police that they went along with Heather's story and acted as a reference for her. The Attorney General's office was made aware of Heather's crimes when they received a referral in late 2022 regarding a patient that had been under Heather's care. An investigation revealed that Heather's spree began in 2020. According to the Attorney General Michelle Henry's office, Heather administered lethal and potentially lethal doses of insulin to at least 22 patients at facilities in Allegheny, Armstrong, Butler, and Westmoreland. 17 of the patients died very soon or sometime later after receiving the insulin doses. She typically administered the insulin during overnight shifts, so that would be when staffing was low and the emergencies wouldn't really draw as much attention. And her victims ranged in age from 43 to 104. Damn. Police searched Heather's phone and they found nearly 20 text messages to her mother involving threats of violence against aides, nurses, facility residents, and even fast food workers. One alleged text from April 6, 2022 read, "Can I kill this man at Taco Bell?" And another from June 10th said, "I'm gonna murder already." Other text messages discussed her patients and her coworkers. In September 2nd, 2022 text, Heather allegedly told her mother that she was gonna murder my aides. In a message a few days later, she complained about a patient who was yelling. and she wrote, "I drugged him already. I don't know how he is awake." On May 12th, 2023, Heather complained to her mother that a patient was, quote, driving her nuts because he was following her around. And the text message read, "But I may kill this resident. I need to set some sort of boundary with him." There's times where we all say, like, "Oh, I'm going to murder him." But this is a little ridiculous, especially given the circumstances now.
Yeah. And even for her to admit that she drugged someone and like a patient, I drugged him, how is he still awake?
Yeah, just doesn't seem like the most compassionate nurse. Yeah. You wouldn't want them caring for one of your loved ones. So the first two victims she was charged with murdering are 55-year-old James Bartow and 83-year-old Joseph Campbell. They died on December 4th and December 25th, respectively, 2022. It's like 55. That's not even old.
No.
The third victim was 43-year-old, so even younger, Nicholas Simbel, who died on May 1st, 2023. Heather did end up pleading guilty to avoid a trial and to take the death penalty off the table. She pleaded guilty to 3 charges of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. When one of her lawyers asked why she was pleading guilty, she replied, "Because I am guilty." Families of some of the victims filed wrongful death lawsuits. The family of Nicholas Simbel said that Heather routinely insulted, berated, bullied, and abused him. They described Nicholas as a brittle diabetic who had an anoxic brain injury, blindness, and neuropathy. The suit alleged that Heather would prevent other nurses from feeding or giving him water and would use derogatory terms in reference to his brain injury. Heather was also accused of saying another patient identified only as JB in the criminal complaint would be, quote, better off dead. That patient, who was a nonverbal at Quality Life Services, was hospitalized twice in 2022 for low blood sugar before he died on December 4th, 2022. In May 2024, Heather was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences for the murders. She was also ordered to subsequently serve another 380 to 760 years in prison for the attempted murders. It always cracks me up. Like, we're like, up 760 years. Like, okay. How's that breaking down? You know? Heather's attorney said that the goal for their client was to avoid the death penalty. One of her attorneys said this was very hard to accomplish with this many deaths and attempted murder charges that either resulted in death or impairment. It's a crazy thing to say.
Yeah.
He also said that Heather wanted to confess and wanted to show contrition regarding her crimes. The attorney went on to say, "Today is a very emotional day. There's a tremendous amount of sad stories that were given by the victims' families, and Mrs. Pressdee did shed a tear several times, as well as apologize at the very end in front of an open court." Sometimes I wonder if defense attorneys, like, hear themselves and inside they're just like,
This one's kind of interesting.
She shed a tear several times.
They, like, basically they're saying that she is a garbage person, but basically they did the bare minimum, so she didn't get the death penalty.
Yeah. The attorney also said that Heather truly believed that she was helping her patients, and this stemmed from her previous employment as a vet tech, where she euthanized animals. It's like, that's one way to spin it. According to the Daily Beast, Heather told investigators that one of her female victims looked at her like an animal would. One man had no quality of life, she said, and she felt bad for another one. One needed to die. And those are all like quotes from her. Heather believed she was ending the suffering of a lot of people by doing what she did, but now she knows that's not the case, and she apologized for her actions. And that's coming from her attorney, which, like, I understand that, but I don't think that's why she was doing it. And obviously, you still can't do that.
Yeah.
I've seen people in hospice before where you're just like, ugh, I wish, like, somehow we could put them out of their misery. They're just hanging on. Their body's just hanging on. And it sucks to have to see people like that. And I do think that, like, some situations you should have that choice, but that's not for her to decide. No. And I don't think that's why she was doing that. Elizabeth Simons Ozella, whose mother is Irene Simmons, was one of the victims. She said she would never forgive Heather for what she did. She took someone from this earth that she had no right to take, and she played God when she didn't have the right. The Attorney General's office also made a statement following the sentencing, saying the defendant used her position of trust as a means to poison patients who depended on her for care. This plea and life sentence will not bring back the lives lost, but it will ensure Heather Pressdee never has another opportunity to inflict further harm. I offer my sincere sympathy to all who have suffered at this defendant's hands.
I find it interesting in this one that, basically she admitted to what she did, but still she was only charged with the 3 murders and the 3 attempted murders when they've said they have evidence that she gave the insulin to at least 22 patients and 17 of them died. But still, this goes back to what we were talking.
Was that where her 380 years
but then it
comes
was
from?
only 3 attempted murders, but then maybe I don't know. Like it's just interesting to me. It goes back to what we were saying earlier about how hard it is to actually go ahead with charges in these types of cases for people who are meant to be administering insulin, for example, to patients for the correct reasons, where she clearly did it to dozens of people, but they were still only able to charge her with the 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. So it just shows you how difficult it is to proceed with those type of charges.
And I bet it's because some of these people were very old, and I still don't think she did it because she wanted to put them out of their misery. Maybe because it was like annoying to her to have to care for them, and she's like, they're basically dead, like I'm doing them a favor. Some of them were probably so old and maybe close to death that it would be hard to prove that what she did is what killed them, kind of. And for some families, it's just not worth it to really proceed or look into and like get an autopsy and all these things. So yeah, it's just very complicated in these situations.
It sounds like a lot of the patients that she was working with were very high needs, possibly nonverbal. So they were unable to give, even the ones that survived, they weren't able to tell their stories about what happened. Whereas in the next case, it's a little bit different. But I just did find it interesting that she was clearly responsible for, 17 or 22 cases, and they only charged her with 3. So an interesting outcome. But still, in this case, I feel like we mentioned, with the hundreds and hundreds of years that she's been jailed for, she will never get out. So even though she was only charged with the murders, I feel like they threw the book at her as much as possible because they know that she was responsible for so many more.
Yeah, that she's just garbage.
So the second case we're going to discuss is an Australian one. It was actually suggested to me by a friend of mine named Katie when I told her that we were looking to do an episode like this. I do find it hard to research Australian cases sometimes, or basically any cases that aren't US cases in general, because very few places have open records and enough information for us to report for a whole episode on. But because this case is finished, the case law documents, which are the court documents, have been released. So I had heard of this case, but I didn't know the details, and thankfully there is enough for us to talk about because it is a heinous case that I feel like didn't probably get enough attention here either, and I'm sure that a lot of our US listeners and international listeners wouldn't have heard about it.
I didn't hear about it until you started talking about it.
So it's about the case of nurse Megan Haines. She was an Australian nurse who murdered 2 elderly patients in Ballina in New South Wales, Australia. She injected them with insulin. Her victims died in May 2014. So this case is a little bit older, but her victims were Marie Dara, and she was 82, and Isabella Spencer, who was 77.
She was entrusted to care for the elderly, supposed to look after them until the end of their lives. But instead, Megan Haines ended them with a lethal dose of insulin because Isabella Spencer and Marie Dara dared to complain about her to management. They died, but fortunately, Marjorie Patterson survived.
Whoever she was came in and flashed the torch in my face and said, "I've been told if you can't sleep, I have to give you Panadol."
It was May 2014 at St Andrew Ballina Aged Care. Haines already had a checkered nursing history. Reprimanded in Victoria 3 times in 2011, she had restrictions put in place on her nursing registration, and still she was allowed around our most weak and vulnerable.
And that was when she screwed my foot round and she nearly broke it off.
Following Isabella and Marie's deaths, Haines never returned to work and resigned over the phone just days later.
Throughout this 2-week murder trial, Haines has showed no emotion. Even when the guilty verdicts were read out, she stared blankly ahead.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the Dara and Spencer families who have had to endure pain and grief.
Haines will return to court next month and faces the possibility of life behind bars. Leonie Ryan, 7 News.
So as some background, Megan was born in South Africa in September 1967. I also know that over there, the pronunciation is generally Megan. When I say over there, the US is Megan generally. Here, the pronunciation is Megan. I've looked up the videos. That is how her name is said, just in case you're wondering. This information about Megan's upbringing is from government documents about the case. It says she was born and raised in South Africa during the apartheid regime. Her mother was white and her father was of Indian background. Her father was violent and, according to Megan, sexually abused her mother and one of her sisters. When Megan was 6, her parents separated and she and her 2 sisters went to live with her mother, and she basically had no contact with her father after that. Megan also recalled some difficulties about growing up in South Africa due to her mixed race appearance. She said that her mother rejected her in favour of her 2 sisters because they were white and she was not. Megan recalled difficulty making friends at high school because the other students didn't understand people of mixed race. So, this obviously isn't an explanation for why she did what she did, but it does sound like she had kind of a troubled upbringing, a broken home, a father who sexually abused her family members. It sounds like she had a rough start to life.
Yeah, definitely.
So Megan trained and practiced as a nurse in South Africa before she moved to Australia in December 2000, and she became a registered nurse here in 2001. Megan has said that she moved to Australia due to the high crime rate in South Africa and the lack of flexible working arrangements. So as I mentioned, she became the nurse here in 2001. The first complaints against her were made in 2005. It was while she was working at a hospital in Victoria. The complaints were investigated and she was found guilty of professional misconduct. Another complaint was made after she threatened to access patient information. She was also investigated for minor assault, which was said to be slapping or pushing a patient, and she was reprimanded at that time. Megan has said that she was getting little sleep at this time as she was a single mother. She said that she was experiencing loneliness and that she had a number of one-night stands. She said that while she was in her 30s, she drank heavily before, during, and after work, quote, just to get through the day. So it seems like she was going through a lot at the time that these
a lot of red flags.
That these first complaints were being made. In July 2007 and into 2008, further complaints were made against her. And at this point, finally, her nursing registration was suspended pending an investigation. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, 2 patients at a facility in Caulfield in Victoria were given unnecessary insulin. After they were drugged, their jewellery had been stolen. Megan was the only nurse on duty on both occasions. A former colleague of hers spoke to the media and said it's a pretty well-off area, so most of the patients just had these beautiful old diamond rings and things. And they were given insulin right at the end of the shift so they wouldn't be roused by the next person rostered on and find it missing. One of the women who was drugged at that time had a security guard posted outside of her room afterwards because she was terrified that it would happen again. The colleague said this poor patient, they didn't know what had happened, so they put a guard outside her door until it was worked out. Everyone was a suspect at that point. So as Megan was the only nurse on charge, her home was searched. They didn't find any jewelry, but they did find marijuana, and this meant that she was charged with drug possession. The investigation was ongoing until December 2011 when she was again found guilty of professional misconduct. She was reprimanded again and she was ordered to supply satisfactory employer reports every 3 months to regulatory authorities. During the time that the investigation took, Megan did not seek renewal of her nursing registration and she became unregistered. So this went on, like she was unregistered and not practicing nursing for a few years. In February 2012, she successfully applied for re-registration. And by April 2013, the conditions for her registration were amended that she only had to supply employer reports every 6 months, which I feel like that is so wild for someone who has had this amount of complaints and investigations against them, that she only had to check in kind of every 6 months to see that she was going all right.
Yeah, it's crazy she was able to just get a job again eventually and get back into
feel
it.
like here too, even to this day, they're still screaming for nurses. Like their nurses are so understaffed, so maybe that played a role in it. That they were just needed a nurse and she was there, so they were a little bit more lax than what they should have been.
Yeah.
So just to note, Megan had 3 children over the years. All of the children had different fathers. Megan gained employment in Ballina in New South Wales in 2014. So this is in a different state to where the other complaints were made. I don't know if there was a reason for that or if that's just where the work was, but she basically moved interstate for this job in 2014. She worked at the St. Andrew's Aged Care Facility. She worked initially on probation and was supervised during shifts, but then that all went all right and she was offered the chance to work the night shift, which meant that she would work from 10:15 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. In terms of security, the facility she worked at seemed to be pretty well equipped and kind of high security. After 5 p.m., you couldn't get in unless you had a swipe card, or a nurse would view you on the CCTV and buzz you in electronically. Each staff member had a personalised swipe card, which gave them access to necessary sections of the facility. So this is information about how the facility was set up, and this is all from the case law government court documents. So they had different wards in the facility, the Baronia ward and the Dianella ward. In the Baronia ward, which accommodated high care residents suffering from dementia, there was one care service employee on duty. In the Dianella ward, which catered for residents with high care needs, there was also one care service employee on duty. In charge of the night shift was the registered nurse, who was for most of the night stationed at the Dianella ward. However, the registered nurse was responsible for all of the residents in the complex. Care service employees were not authorised to, nor were they responsible for the administration of medication in either ward. In another area, they could administer some routine prescription medication. So basically, Megan was the registered nurse. In both wards, there was one other employee during the night who was kind of like a nurse's aide who would just assist. But Megan was the one who was responsible for administering the majority of the medications to the patients.
Yeah.
Before we get into the events of the 10th of May 2014, we'll give you some information about the two victims. The first one was Isabella Spencer, and she was born in November 1936. She was 77 at the time of her death, as we mentioned. She had moved to the St. Andrews facility after she'd suffered a stroke in December 2013, so she'd been there for around 5 months. The stroke had left her paralysed on the left-hand side. Isabella was mainly bedbound and she required staff assistance to move around. They've said that she was cognitively intact and she was not insulin dependent. Isabella resided in the Dianella ward at the facility. Marie Dara was born in September 1931 and she was 82 when she died. She had been in the facility for quite a while. She'd been there since February 2011 as she had a number of health issues. She also was in the Dianella ward and she was cognitively intact and was not insulin dependent. So on the night of May 9th, 2014, Megan was the only staff member who had a swipe card with access to the medication room in both the wards. At 11:15 that night, on her night shift, the director of care, a woman named Wendy Turner, came to meet with Megan. Megan was told that she had been complained about by 3 residents of the care facility. Wendy, which I can't believe she did this, but she told Megan about 2 of the residents by name. She mentioned Isabella, and then there was also another woman named Marjorie Patterson. Megan was told that she had to attend a meeting on May 13th in regards to these complaints. Megan was given documents about the complaints, which had the information about basically what had been said, and was also told that they could result in disciplinary action. Megan was told not to approach either Isabella or Marjorie and that she was not to enter their rooms to provide treatment unless she was accompanied by another employee.
Maybe they just shouldn't have told her the names.
Yeah, I know. Even they should have said to her, there's going to be a meeting, you've had some complaints made about you and done it at the meeting, not while she's going to be on call with these women that night. I just feel like that is a big administrative error. So Marie's complaint was regarding a request that she'd made for some medication to treat a genital itch. I won't read it all out because I feel like it's quite degrading, the terminology that was used, but basically she asked for some cream for her genitals and she asked Megan to apply some, and Megan said, "Cover yourself up, you look disgusting," switched the light off and left the room. So basically refused to help this elderly woman who needed help. Wendy Turner would later speak about the complaints, and she said another patient reported being roughly handled by Megan. Isabella reported that Megan had refused to take her to the bathroom and told her to, quote, piss in her pad instead, so refused to help these elderly. Isabella was a stroke patient who was paralysed and refused to help her toilet. It's horrible. Court documents do indicate that Isabella wasn't named by Wendy on that night, and we assume that Megan kind of deduced who the third person was who made the complaint. I think that she was told it was about helping someone go to the bathroom, and so she kind of figured out herself who the third complainant was. So after the meeting with Wendy concluded, Megan was left alone in the Dianella wards for 2 separate 1-hour periods between midnight and 1 a.m. and again between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. This happened as the care service employee rostered in the ward would move to another ward to assist with the rounds. So when that happened, Megan was in the ward with the patients by herself. believed that Megan entered the medication room during the first period of 12 to 1 a.m. and drew up 2 injections of insulin, and it's thought that is when she injected both Isabella and Marie. It seems that the patients were checked on their rounds based on their needs. So someone obviously with higher needs would be checked more frequently. I'm guessing most of the residents would sleep overnight. So if they were just, of a lesser need, they wouldn't be checked as frequently. Marie was not ordinarily checked. However, Isabella was. Megan was the employee to check Isabella that night, and she told her colleague that no further attention was needed. Marjorie Patterson, who was the third complainant, would later tell authorities that she'd woken up on the night of May 9 to Megan giving her paracetamol, which had never happened before. So, whether or not it really was or what she was trying to do, but Marjorie awoke and found what Megan was doing. During the next round of checks between 4 and 5 a.m., Megan told her colleague that Isabella was, quote, okay. Megan finished her night shift at around 6:30 on the 10th of May. She didn't report anything out of the ordinary during the handover to the day staff. At 6:50 a.m., staff went into Marie's room and tried to wake her. She was unconscious, and it was apparent that she was in a deep coma. She died at 11:30 a.m. that day. At 7:30 a.m., staff went to wake Isabella for breakfast, and she was also unconscious. She died at 11:50 a.m. on May 10. When they investigated, both women had been injected with significant quantities of insulin, and they were, as we mentioned, neither of them were insulin dependent, and they fell into a hypoglycemic coma. Hypoglycemia, if it's not reversed and it remains for hours, can lead to brain damage and death. So that's how both women passed away. It seems like the police started to investigate the case pretty quickly. I guess 2 deaths in the same morning, or kind of unexpected deaths, would, raise some suspicion.
Yeah, not very subtle on her part.
Yeah. On May 15th, 2014, Megan's residence was searched by the authorities. She hadn't worked since the night shift when the women died, and she also hadn't been informed of their deaths. While her home was being searched, Megan was told that it was because the police were investigating the unexpected and suspicious deaths of Isabella and Marie. Megan was not told how the women died at that point. Megan called a friend that morning, May 15, and told them that the women had died because they were given the wrong medication. So this is all in the court documents, but basically Megan wasn't meant to have any knowledge how these women died. She wasn't told anything, but she still called a friend that day and seemed to have some type of knowledge about how they did pass away. Megan resigned from the facility a few days after the women died. During the investigation into this case, a former partner of Megan's came forward. He said that in 2009, they'd been watching a CSI-style show, and Megan had kind of, scoffed at the plot and said it was ridiculous. She said that she knew how to kill someone and never get caught. She said it's easy. Inject them with insulin because the body continues to metabolize insulin, so it looks like natural causes. During the investigation, it also emerged that Megan had no contact with her 2 youngest children. She said that she maintained a good relationship with her eldest child, and in 2016, the children were aged 25, 14, and 6. Obviously, that doesn't really have any bearing on the case, but it just kind of indicates the brokenness of her life at the time. There are no records of Megan being diagnosed with any mental health conditions. She told police in 2016 that she was, quote, not feeling anything and that she was generally healthy. During the investigation, Megan did not tender a report from a psychologist or psychiatrist about any factors that may have led to her committing these crimes. So basically that couldn't be taken into account during the trial or during her sentencing because she had no diagnosis to contend with. Megan was arrested in July 2014 and she was charged over the nursing home murders. While she was detained, a relative visited her in jail. Megan told her to remove some jewelry from behind a PowerPoint or electrical outlet in the home. So as we mentioned earlier, this is possibly the jewelry that she allegedly stole years earlier. Maybe this had been ongoing from other patients that she'd stolen. So it kind of corroborates that part of the investigation. So Megan went to trial in 2016 and she was 49 years old when she was given a maximum sentence of 36 years. The trial ran for 2.5 weeks. Marie's daughter Charlie spoke at the trial and said, I'm shocked and absolutely appalled she got her nursing registration back. I can't fathom it. I am lost for words. The Justice Peter Garling said Megan abused her position of trust. He said her conduct was deliberate and calculating. It was a gross breach of trust and a flagrant abuse of her power. She clearly abused that position of trust. I consider this to be a significant aggravating factor. So Megan will be eligible for parole in 2041 and she will be 73 years old. So I feel like this is a case where she probably had done it before and just hasn't been picked up, may not be able to be picked up due to the passage of time. But if she's speaking to her ex-partner about this in 2009, about how easy it is to kill someone, plus she was investigated for similar incidents in the past, I would absolutely not be shocked if she had done this previously.
Yeah. It's just shitty that you trust these people to take care of your loved one. Like, you're putting family members in nursing facilities or even just in hospitals where they need more care because you expect nurses, doctors, the staff there to be able to take care of your loved one better than you're able to, in the sense that they have more education and they obviously know medical things that you don't. But if you even had an inkling of knowledge that this is how they were going to treat your loved one, it's like you just would rather have them with you than having someone who's a nurse who's supposed to be compassionate towards them telling them like, you're disgusting, like, cover yourself up, and degrading them. And it's just really heartbreaking, the degrading and rude comments alone, when these people already feel so probably helpless, and it's probably very scary for them. And I would much rather have someone who was kind helping me versus being scared and having someone also be rude to you. Just even without the murdering part, the rest of it is just as awful to hear.
I found some more interesting stats. Obviously, in these two cases, these women committed murder against multiple patients, but according to the National Library of Medicine, the most common kind of form of abuse by healthcare providers is physical restraint. That's 22% of cases. Verbal abuse was 22% as well, and neglect was 20%. Sexual abuse was 2%. So it's just interesting. Like, not to get into too much detail, but I have a family member who has been in and out of hospital over the years, and I know nurses are busy. Like, don't get me wrong, nurses are essential. We need them. But I have seen some cases where, people wait for hours now. It's just often due to understaffed as well, like, staff issues. But the neglect thing, I can see that would happen quite frequently, maybe on purpose in some cases, like when we talk about Megan not wanting to help the patients, but in other cases, maybe it's just due to the staffing levels and the inability of nurses to be everywhere at once. But I can understand that. But even just sexual abuse of patients, it's just too horrific to even think about. These people who rely on you to basically live, and you're abusing that position of trust.
Obviously, most nurses are caring people, and that's how they got into their career. But I know everyone who I know that is a nurse or works in healthcare is so burnt out and exhausted right now post-pandemic because of staffing issues. A lot of healthcare, especially in the United States, I don't know how it is in Australia, but it's really just turned more so into a business, and everything's about numbers, and everyone is just treated shittily, like staff. Everyone's rushed. Everyone has to like have certain turnarounds and do things like a certain way. And I just know a lot of nurses are feeling burnt out. So if there are any nurses listening, don't take this as us being like, oh, these nurses are horrible. We know that you guys don't have it easy, and we appreciate all of the great nurses. Obviously, these are two very unique situations, but it's sad that you just never know when you're going to cross paths with a person like this. It's pretty rare, hopefully. I know a lot of it goes unreported, but it's one of those things you don't want to think too much about it.
No, and even like, this is kind of going off on a bit of a tangent, but I know like what you mentioned, these are just the two bad apples in a pool of a million good apples. Like, I'm sure the majority are good, but it happens in every profession. Like, even when you think about pilots, there's some who intentionally crash planes and take out hundreds of people with them just for whatever their reasoning is. Like, it happens in every profession. This isn't only happening in healthcare. It happens in a lot of cases where people are responsible for other human beings.
Yeah, it's just the theme of our episode today.
Yes. Exactly.
For Megan's, I'm hoping like the family members of these people, they could sue someone obviously for wrongful death, but it's just crazy to me that she was able to get a job again, get her license again after all of the things. And I know, like you said, like maybe they were just desperate, but even if they were desperate, look at what happened.
Yeah.
It just seems like negligence somewhere.
Even I know, like, I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to get sued. But I know here there's a website. I'm pretty sure it's called APHRA, APHRA, where you can go and you can, and I know you guys have similar things in the US. I've looked it up before. You can go and you can check like a doctor's credentials and see if they've had any disciplinary actions against them. But like when I speak to friends who are nurses and they tell me about people who are still practicing after things that they've done, I'm like, this is wild. I guess, I know restrictions are put on.
Even with Matthew Perry.
Yeah.
The doctor basically being investigated for having a hand in his death and murder and writing fake prescriptions. He was still allowed to practice for a bit as long as he handed out the patients a waiver of being like, just so you know,
I'm facing these charges.
But it's like,
yeah.
Are we that desperate for healthcare professionals? Maybe
we are.
But at what cost?
Yeah.
I don't know. On a whole another scale, just the healthcare system is so broken and messed up right now. Just going to the doctor, I know this is like off on a tangent, but it does still kind of relate. I have to like schedule a physical, or even if I have to schedule any appointment, just the whole process of it makes me not want to do it because it's such a dread. Like even just calling the office, trying to get someone on the phone, trying to schedule an appointment, you're on hold forever. It's just very hard to go through the whole system these days. So just with these added things in it as well, it's just sad. And I hope somehow, someday it can be fixed, but I don't know because, like I said, it's just a business now, sadly.
Yeah.
So that's really it for these cases. So everything will be on the blog at truecrimesocietyblog.com. We mentioned some of the documents were on there in full if you wanted to check them out. And make sure you're following us on Instagram. We're always posting updates there, all that. And if you want to check out our personal accounts, mine is StephSum_. Olivia's TCS Olivia, if you want to see what we're up to. Of course, we have Patreon. If you are interested in more content, we do an extra weekly bonus episode on Patreon. So that's 2 episodes a week. None of them have ads. They're all ad-free. And the regular like weekly episode comes out a day earlier. We are thinking of maybe revamping in the coming months, maybe adding more things, trying to figure that all out. So if you guys are on Patreon already, let us know of any other things you'd want to check out. So yeah, you can find us on Patreon. And the usual stuff, if you leave us nice comments, ratings, reviews, all those things, and sharing the podcast to your Instagram stories or anywhere is a huge help to us. It just helps spread the word and maybe get some new listeners from that as well. So we always appreciate when you guys do that. And that's it. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you guys for listening. Stay safe. Peace out. I forgot what to say. Let me say it again. All right, so thank you guys for listening. Stay safe out there. Peace out.